I'm going to start off just talking a little bit about who we're about, what we're all about, what my center is about, and why we created this tool, the purposes, the goals around it, because I think that's important, right? Where we're coming from. So, as I mentioned, we are a research center at USC. We're nonpartisan, academic, of course. We are known, aside from things like the citing tool, known for producing research on voting behavior, trying to understand patterns of both participation and underrepresentation and representation. And we've done a lot of research around election reforms, understanding, how they are being implemented, the impact of those reforms, both in California and nationally. And really this tool that we're going to talk about today really came out of that work. So in California, we started the tool back in 2018 when the state was changing in some counties, changing from a polling place model to a vote center model. There was a lot of excitement about that change amongst advocates and election officials, but there's also a lot of conversation around how would election officials be able to cite with such a significant number in, reduction in the number of voting locations. Would they be able to do that? Could there be a tool that would be made that would help them go through the citing process and cite equitably and accessibly? So we embarked on this journey. We created the voting location citing tool. Before we built anything, we actually worked for about a year or so just getting input from election officials, the Secretary of State's office, statewide groups across the state. So what we would build hopefully would actually match the needs on the ground when it came to citing. And that's what I'm going to show you today. By the time 2020 came along, is there a bit of an echo in my background? Can people hear an echo?
Just a little bit. I didn't know if there was anything you could tweak.
More like static.
Yes, something.
Bit of static.
1 second.
There you go. That was better.
It was better because I put myself on mute, but I just turned off I have a little fan over here. Is that better?
Yes, it is. Thanks.
Okay. Sometimes it shows up on Zoom, sometimes it doesn't. So thanks. So we fast forward to 2020 and we had expanded the tool outside of California to a total of 10 states. States like Arizona, New Mexico, Florida, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and so forth. And then by the next year, we had expanded to an additional 4 states, including your wonderful, lovely state. Has anyone, I did give a presentation a while back to a coalition. Some of you, I think were on the call, right? But most of you, this is probably new. Okay. In a moment, Kelly's going to give an actual demo of the tool itself. I just want to cover a couple more things about it. So it is initially, at least its primary purpose was all about citing. So suggested through modeling locations or half-mile squares where we think there are good locations to consider putting polling places that will be, the idea is to be the most accessible possible, right, for communities considering multiple needs. The tool also, though, functions very much to provide a lot of data for other things other than citing. So outreach and voter education efforts. As a matter of fact, very soon we're going to publicly announce that we're changing the name of the tool. Instead of the voting location citing tool, it's going to be the voting location and outreach tool, just to really emphasize the outreach component. There's just a wealth of data you'll see in a little bit that you can use for all kinds of purposes. And we hope many things that we've never even thought of. The tool is designed to be as flexible as possible. So both in the way you can use the data for citing to meet different kinds of conversations, but also in all of the other data, like I said, for outreach and so forth. So the last thing I will mention is on the citing itself, you'll see as Kelly demos it, that we are very careful in the language that we use. So we say suggested areas, suggested half-mile areas. That is just to emphasize that we recognize that this model, no matter how sophisticated as it is still data, right? And it's limited in the inputs that you put into it. And there are many factors that election officials, that community groups want to consider, need to consider when they're citing. And so we say this model is not the locations, but rather we hope that the data and the suggestions in it inform conversations. And we hope in the most open, transparent way possible as well. So we have election officials that sometimes that we bring it to, we want to make sure they know about it. We want to make sure they feel comfortable with it. So that ups the chances are obviously that they're going to use it in their process. They can use it internally. We hope they also want to use it externally in conversations in the community. And very much, sometimes those conversations start from community groups that will bring it to election officials as well, right? And we think that coming from a neutral academic research center, data-driven tool, it facilitates all of that and builds trust over time, not just in one election, but hopefully over time. So I will leave it there. Kelly, can you go ahead and, can she share screen? Oh, yes, right, if we have your link, right?
Yes.
Go ahead and demo away.
Let's see here. Is everyone able to see that all right?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Yeah, so this is our citing tool for Ohio. Actually, I'll open up our website here at CID so you can see how to get here if you don't have the direct link. So this is our website for the Center for Inclusive Democracy, and you can click here to get to the citing tool. And here you can see all the different sites or all the different states that we have created the tool for, and then you can click on Ohio to get there. I'll just click out of these ones. Yes, so this is our homepage. First, I'm going to dive into showing you the voting locations modeled by a given county. Does anyone have a county that they would like to provide for me to demo? If not, then I'll go ahead.
Stark County.
Stark County, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go over here to the drop-down menu and find your county. So here we go. This is Stark County. And over here on the left is where we have all of our different layers. So up top here is where our voting location layers are. I'm going to come back to those and show you all of our other data layers first. So down here, we have additional data. We have our voter data layers, our demographic and population data layers, and our points of interest data layers. And some of these are used in our model, but others of these we've just added because we find that they're useful to folks in their outreach and work. So here under voter data, you can see, for example, we have % of eligible voters not registered, and this is visualizing data at the census tract level. And you can see the breakdown of the data here in the legend. And anywhere where we have these little arrows, you can view data by different subgroups. So here we have 2016 vote by mail data. We also have that for 2020, and the same for registered voter turnout. And if you click on this, first you're seeing the vote by mail rate for all populations, but here you can break it out by Asian American or Black, Black voters. And yeah, and then down here we have our demographic and population data layers. And so we have population density or % of population in poverty, for example. And similarly, we have a few different layers broken out by subgroups also. So here we have Latino % of population, and you can actually see the Mexican % of population or Puerto Rican if you so desire. And you might notice some of these layers have some cross-hatching. We've included that for data sources that have a high level of uncertainty. So a lot of times, especially for these subgroups, that just comes from a small sample size. So a little more unreliable, and we're letting users know about that. Okay, and then I'll clear those, and we have points of interest layers down here. So for instance, we have precinct boundaries in case that's useful to you. And then we've included special for Ohio, the county elections offices. There's only one per county, and sometimes it's a little tricky to find. So I don't actually see where Stark County's is. It should be bright blue. I don't see it, but it's there somewhere. It's tricky when there's only one dot, but here you can see what these actually look like a little better. These are the 2020 general election voting locations, and if you zoom in, you can see that location more precisely, and you can click on it to get the name of that voting location. And then we also have transit stops available, which we use in our modeling, and then some points of interest. We've broken these out into government and non-government points of interest, and have joined them together. If you'd like to view them that way, you can click on them again and see what this location is. And you might notice, maybe you don't see your local post office or elementary school here in the points of interest, and it's because this is a crowdsourced data source coming from OpenStreetMaps. And so, in some places it's not as reliable as others, but this is free data that we're able to use. So we're providing it here. So next, going to the heart of our tool, the voting locations. So here I'm going to start with the all potential areas right here. And so like Mindy was saying, we don't model, or we don't identify exact locations. We're not local to Ohio, and we don't have the on the ground information to be able to do that. So instead, we're modeling at the half square mile areas. And so here, what we've done is we've covered the entire county in a grid of these half mile squares. And we've removed any cells that don't have a population. And then we've narrowed it down further to only include areas that have a certain density of roads and a certain density of points of interest that could be used for voting locations. So the end result is what you're seeing here. These are all of the areas that we've identified could potentially host a voting location. And then up top here on the left is where we have our suggested voting locations. So I'll turn those on now. You can see those are outlined in black. And so these are the sites that we've modeled to be most optimal. And so we do that by running a facility location model that takes into account the travel time for different population clusters to reach each site, as well as a score that we've assigned to each site based on certain characteristics. So that score is what you're seeing reflected in the colors here, where the darker pink is a higher score, and closer to white is a low score. And if you click on one of these sites, you can see the breakdown of those characteristics. So you see here, we're including percent of county voting age citizens, or population density, disabilities percent of the population. All of these are taken into account and weighted in a certain way in our scoring. So together, between the population distribution, which is determined by the travel times, and the site score, we've narrowed it down to these locations as the most optimal. And so, you see that not all of these are the highest scoring sites. You see some of these have a low score, but that's so that there are enough sites to serve all the different population groups. You wouldn't want to have all sites, in the most, in a denser area, or all in one area. That wouldn't serve the county well. And so here also, so we have 111 voting locations for Stark County. This number comes from the number of voting locations that was used in the 2020 general election. So we're modeling the locations themselves, not the number of sites. And in case folks are interested in seeing what the next best sites are, maybe they're interested in using more than that 111, we've modeled here under additional voting location options, an additional 10% of those sites. So in this case, we've added 12 sites. These are the 12 next best sites And so you can see these ones are outlined in blue. So that's just if you're interested in citing additional locations past that number. Let's see here. And then if you're interested in learning more about those data layers that we're using, you can go down here to the bottom right. We have this data descriptions and download, and you can read through, learn more about each of these layers. And at the bottom is where you can download all of this data yourself, either as CSVs or shapefiles, and use in whatever way you would like. And then up here to the right, if you're interested in learning more about the modeling that we use or other methodology, you can click here. And here we have more information on how we identify those suitable areas, the scoring and the facility location model. And we have more detailed information on all of the different data layers that we use, their sources, any calculations that we use to create those. So yeah, I would be happy to demo another county if folks would like, or just open up to questions, whatever is of most interest.
Thank you so much, Kelly and Mindy, for being here and for demonstrating the tool and talking to us a little bit more about the background. For anybody that is with us, if you, if you would like to see your county demoed, please put that the name of your county in the chat. And second, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat. And if you would like to unmute and ask your question, if you could just like raise your hand or signal us to let us know that you'd like to ask your question over your mic. While we see what counties we might also want to demonstrate, I want to ask, now we are able to see where the current polling locations, and you are able to tell us kind of like optimally where additional polling locations would be. But let's say I live in Franklin County, and we were looking at Stark County. Is there anything that factors in whether additional polling locations are actually needed? So those places that are in a dark pink, does that take into consideration that there is already a nearby polling location, or that there's not a nearby voting location? Does it assume that that voting location is going to remain there?
Kelly, you want me to jump in?
Sure, go ahead.
Sure. Well, one thing I just want to make sure is clear. We are not showing current locations as the elections office has planned them or is conducting where the locations are actually going to be. So ours is independent. This tool is independent of what election officials are actually doing during a given election. So as you know, if we tried to track just to show it on our tool, often that is changing, right? In many counties, or at least many across the country. So what we show, this tool is kind of independent of what election officials are doing. It is saying kind of if you were just starting, right, resetting the deck, if you will, what would be an accessible, equitable kind of set of locations. What we do have, Kelly, could you click on the points of interest? So we do, as Kelly noted a moment ago, we do show previous locations. And sorry, 2020 general election locations. And we don't actually have a year there for county election offices. Kelly, do you want to describe that?
The county elections offices.
Yeah, that's just the current office location, right?
Yeah, and they're used for early voting and drop boxes.
Yeah. So there's a slight possibility that since we last updated that could be changed, but highly. Yeah. So does that make sense? And so we're showing locations. Thank you. The only reason why we have previous locations there is just simply we've gotten requests from election officials and others. We're not saying that the new locations should be the same as old locations. It's just informational.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes, thank you for the clarification. I did know that these are 2020 polling locations. It's helpful to be reminded that this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with any updates that might happen now in 2022. My own polling location has changed. I suggest that I'm sure that all of you are the type to know if your polling location has changed, but continue to remind the people that you work with also to make sure they know where their polling location is going to be, to check that with vote.ohio.gov. So we have some additional requests for demonstration, but first I will take questions. Jerry, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, please. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Licking County's Observer Corps. I observe the monthly meetings of the Licking County Board of Elections. So I, number one, very much like to see what Licking County looks like. Number two, I want to end up having a better sense of how to communicate this information to the board, because I think at the very least they'd be interested in seeing this, and I don't know that they have seen it. So there's Licking County. Thank you very much.
I was muted. When you say communicate, what do you mean? I guess we have information on the site. We also have a one-pager that you could download on our main website where the US map is. But do you mean something specific in terms of communication?
No, I just think this is something that I want to make available to the Board of Elections there, because I'm there every month talking to them or seeing them, and I just think it's the first I've heard of this tool, and I don't know whether they know it or not. So I just want to end up with how I collect this data and send it over to them, or collect the tool.
That sounds great. We always appreciate not only groups like yourselves telling other groups like other colleagues, but also certainly election officials. We have given a presentation. We were asked, I'm trying to remember now, if it was last year, after we launched the Ohio tool, we gave a presentation, a demonstration at the Election Official Conference, Association Conference.
Okay.
Of course, not everybody's there. Not everybody remembers, understandably so, everybody's incredibly swamped these days in the elections field. But we're always happy to come and give a demo to a local board or local office. You can keep that in mind as well, or to talk offline, in an unofficial, not in an official meeting, but to set up a Zoom as long as that's appropriate to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I was just going to add one more thing just about the general voting locations. I appreciate the note about wanting to make sure people understand that they've changed. We are not at all suggesting that people go and click on this link to tell them where their voting location is, right? It's really not for the general public as a tool, like you would go to your county or local elections office or board, right, for that. This is for users of the tool talking about citing, right, and outreach, just to see where the previous locations are. And particularly if the current elections locations have not been cited yet, right? You can look at our tool, what we're suggesting, you can look at previous, it's just informational. And our locations are designed to be, they're not in coordination with what election officials are doing. But we, as Kelly noted, you can look at the entire county, you can look up on this map what election officials, you can put them in an address, you can find a location that an election official is citing. You can get demographic information, modeling information about that site. So you have some information to kind of help you digest where that location is and information about it to help you discuss it. Or you can also just go to the locations that we have suggested, or you can do both. So we want to give you flexibility in how it's used. What was the next question?
I was just going to note really quick while we're on this county, I forgot to mention before, but you can see here, we also provide additional voting locations based on distance for some counties where the locations that we've identified are greater than a 15-minute drive from certain population clusters. So you'll usually see this in the slightly more rural areas or where maybe there are less voting locations. So just wanted to point that out.
Actually, Kelly, would you mind just unclicking the all potential areas?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to explain that because I think there might have been a question in the chat about it. What we do here is we cite, see the number 27 up there? We're citing as close as we can to what is legally required in that county. If we're not able to calculate that for various reasons, we'll use the most recent election in terms of a number because the tool needs a number. We don't want to pick or make a judgment in terms of how many locations a county should have. That's not our role. We don't have enough information. So we're not saying this county should have 20 or 25 or 30 or 50. So instead, the tool in every county that we're in is trying to decide as close to what legally or what the norm is in terms of what election officials are citing. So it kind of matches what their constraints are, right? They're required to cite 30 or they're required to cite 50. And so the tool shows them what 50 would be, right? Or what 30 would be. But this additional voting location options, this is for when an election official may be wanting to cite above their minimum. And they're trying to make decisions about where would they put their resources, right? Because this could be, so varied across election jurisdictions, in terms of resources and how many they're actually considering. We just do a set process for everybody. So the first one is, it says options based on model. If you clicked on the I, you would see an explanation for it. So the first option is simply just 10% above whatever the minimum is or whatever is the base that we're modeling. And then you round up. So 10% of 27 is 3, rounded up. So across the country, everywhere where there's a tool in every county, we show additional locations based on the model. It's just 10% more, kind of out of fairness, is right, 10% more. Some people might want to do 20%. Some might want to do 5%. The other, as Kelly mentioned, the other option is totally based on distance. So we move away from the model. It's not the next 3 that the model would pick. Instead, it's just solely based on distance. Given what the model has already chosen, the 27 locations, it says, okay, based on these 20, do you mind clicking on those 27 locations, Kelly? It says, okay, based on these 27 locations that the model has selected, it then does an analysis to say, is there anybody traveling more than 15 minutes, right, like Kelly covered. And this is gonna vary tremendously across counties. Some, there's 0, some it's 10, some it's 40. Here in this county, it turns out that after citing 27, it's saying at this number, at 27, there's still one more needed to make sure that nobody in the county is traveling more than 15 minutes, as we're best able to determine it. So those are those 2 options. And that's, again, based on requests that we've gotten from election officials, but also community groups saying, well, what if we want to go above that minimum number? What was the next question? Sorry.
Barb, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, thank you. This is very informative and kind of based on what Jerry talked about. I too am an observer each month at the Board of Elections. What's been your reception? What have the boards of elections either in Ohio or other states that you've worked in? I'm more interested in Ohio. What's been their response to hearing about this and seeing what it shows?
Yeah, I'll be honest, we've gotten a lot of positive response and use across the country, but not as much penetration in Ohio. So we gave, at a state level, they've been very receptive. I said we were invited, to give a presentation at the conference. That went well. Had some follow-up after that, certainly. We've reached out to every election official in Colorado just as of a few months ago again. But I'm not sure how many are using it. We really value talking to we know folks are using it because we see hits on our website. But I want to know, it's really important to us to know that also advocates and community groups are using it as well. And sometimes you guys are the best ones to bring it to the attention of election officials. Election officials sometimes forget, again, because of the, crazy circumstances that we're in. Sometimes they really appreciate it and really value it, but it's just difficult for them to kind of incorporate it. Others, they incorporate it all the time. And there's some amazing ways that election offices across the country are using it. But sometimes the best messenger is actually the local, right? Who comes and says, hey, we're using this. We think this is really helpful. We want you to use it too, if you think it's useful. So I'd like to just see, the bottom line, I'd like to see more use in Ohio. And we would love it if you guys think this is valuable, if you want to, help spread the word to your local.
Mindy, can you, you mentioned that people are using it in amazing ways across the country. Can you talk to us about conversations you've had with users and how they are approaching boards of elections, maybe giving everybody here a model of, what they can do with this as an advocate and how they can approach their board of election?
Yeah, and of course, for most of the states we're in, they're not boards of elections, they're county elections offices. That's why you'll hear me use that language a lot. And I want to recognize that that's just a different kind of relationship, right? A board versus an elections office. But I can give you some just examples. So there's an EAC webinar, if you know the Elections Assistance Commission, that has a conversation. You may find it useful if you want to share it with your board, for instance, your local board, that has a conversation with Keith Ingram, who's the director of elections for the state of Texas, and also a local election official in Napa County in California. And they're both talking about how it can be used, how it's useful. The Napa registrar talks about when he was first switching over to a new model, which reduced his number of polling places to vote centers. He had a lot. So here's the example. So he had, this is an example of how it can build trust. So he had a lot of skepticism by local groups. He had local groups, he had groups coming in from other areas of the state, really wondering how he was going to go about this citing process and being really concerned that it was going to be equitable. So he had a lot of eyes, and which is generally a good thing, right, to have a lot of conversation. And as soon as we made the tool available, he brought it to all of those folks. He had a convening. He saw that there was a lot of overlap between what the tool was suggesting and what he was suggesting, but of course there were sites where there wasn't overlap. And he embraced the fact that where there was overlap, what it did is it kind of built trust, right? So community groups that didn't know exactly how to gauge these new potential locations that he wanted to use, when they saw that a lot of it was supported by data, that helped build some trust. But it also said, hey, there's a lot where the data is saying something different. And so it kind of narrowed down the conversation, and everyone was able to kind of talk about where there were differences and what they thought about that, work it through, use the data, right? Where groups could say, hey, we don't think it should be here. We think it should be over here. This is what the data is showing. And it led to a really collaborative process, as I understand it, that was really open and transparent. And we always encourage election offices or boards, right, to work with communities wherever possible when they're doing the citing process, but to use transparency, publicly available data and data tools. Another example is Harris County, Texas, where they were citing over 800 locations. So it's a really big county. Napa's really tiny. I don't think they'll mind me saying that. And in Harris, they were looking forward to the tool. They've been really receptive to it, answering questions about their local system and all of that. When we launched it, they decided to ask us to come to a regular meeting that they had with their community groups and open to resident members as well, and to talk about the tool. So they had already posted their locations. We are now showing, our suggested locations via the tool. Yes, there were things that were different, but they gave us the space to talk about, what the data is saying. And then we step out because we're not an advocacy group. We just present the data. And then community groups stepped in, and the registrar, and they literally had a conversation on the call. And my understanding, many conversations afterwards about areas where the registrar had not cited, but the tool was suggesting there were sites. and they were able to talk through, empowered by data, to figure out what was actually what they should be doing in those areas. So that's an example. Not, those are both examples where election offices brought the tool right to the community. But we also had already had meetings, for instance, in Napa, and there were people on the ground in Harris County that also were aware of the tool as well. So I think there would have eventually been some sort of conversation, but it was really facilitated by the election official knowing about it, being open to it, and wanting to use the tool. And so that's why we always try to make sure that election officials not only know about the tool, but feel comfortable with it and feel it's something that is actually going to be useful for them. I'm hoping those are good examples that answer the question I was given.
Yeah, those are great examples, Mindy. So 2 things, if anybody here wants to kind of suggest this, first I want to go back to the point where Mia had asked, and there was a demonstration that you can see the current, not current, but from 2020 polling locations versus the suggested areas for polling locations. And if you in your county, your county best. As you mentioned, this is plugging in data, but if you feel that there's something there and a conversation that needs to be had with your board about polling locations in your county, then this tool is a great place to start that conversation and use it as a point of data. And then Mindy, afterwards, if the board is interested in having you as a guest, what is the best way to reach you to invite you for like a local conversation or demonstration in that county?
You have our email address, my email address, so please feel free to pass it along. And then I thought I heard you say 2020, but yeah, of course, for you, the most relevant, right, would be comparing 2022 if they're already cited in the community, and you want to, have a conversation around those locations or suggest additional locations or changing locations. The suggested modeling is what can help inform that conversation. And then somebody asked, should I just answer the question in the chat about the outreach component?
Yes.
Okay. And I think Kelly talked about this really well. So there's the modeling component, which is up there on the upper left-hand side, right? Suggested voting locations. But again, everything kind of below that. So everything that under the additional data, see where it says voter data, she's opening up right there, the demographic and population data, the points of interest. Much of all of this data are also in the actual modeling, but we make it available and then some as individual layers so you can use it, for all kinds of purposes. You can still use it for citing, so you could look at the suggested modeling that we were just looking at, the pink squares, and maybe you want to overlay a certain population, like the Latino population, the Black population, the youth population, poverty. So it can help kind of inform further your citing conversations. Or for outreach, you can just use this data independent of citing. So you can just click on any of these. Like for instance, there's the percent of eligible voters not registered. I was talking to a group just a few weeks ago, a national group that actually are training all of their different community organizers in different states to use this tool. And one of the main things they use is that button right there. So they want to know the areas in their community where the highest share of eligible not registered voters, right, for voter outreach purposes. Vote by mail rate, turnout rate is an obvious one too. Turnout, of course, varies by elections, but generally patterns across the community. So you can have a high turnout year, a low turnout year, but generally the relationship, the higher turnout areas are going to stay probably pretty similar. The lower turnout areas are going to stay probably pretty similar, just the numbers differ. And you can use that, your community's best, so you'll know whether, there was something unique in a given election, but you can use that turnout information to help you kind of target, for instance, lower turnout areas. And again, we have it broken out, as Kelly said, by the available data we have for race and ethnicity and age for youth. Kelly, can you scroll down just a little bit further? So you see there's also the disability, percent of the population with people with disabilities, limited English proficient. Why that? Because those are communities that are often targeted for citing, but also for outreach. Poverty, the same sort of thing. So I'll leave it there. I'm hoping I'm answering the question. And then, as Kelly mentioned, you can also go to the data descriptions and download section and download these data, pull them into your own systems if you have sophisticated systems. They're also just available as CSVs. You can, convert them into Excel files, and you can look at all of this data and, use it for whatever outreach or voter education purposes, independent of the tool itself and the data visualization component of it. Other questions?
Thank you so much for making all of this available to us, especially kind of like separately helping people understand what are the different components that go into it. I know that there's a lot of people here that are more focused on the Board of Elections work that they do, but some of you are very involved also in getting people registered to vote, getting people out to vote. This is a tremendous tool for so many reasons. Please take this back to the groups that you work with, other than Board of Elections, but for your voter outreach work, it'll really help you target. I know that we've had conversations in this group about, doing voter registration tables and not really seeing results, being out at a place, for hours and not necessarily like really benefiting anybody. If you're not in the places where people need to be registered the most, then you want to be able to kind of use your time the most efficiently, benefit the greatest number of people possible. And this tool really helps you do that. And so I'm excited today to have Mindy show us the different aspects of that. Barb asked, did I miss how often the data is updated?
Speaking of which, Kelly, do you want to go ahead and answer that one? Jump in on that.
Sure, yeah. So we update the whole tool ahead of each general and primary election. So I think I actually forgot to mention what we're seeing here were voting locations for the 2022 primary election. So we're in the process of starting to update for the 2022 general election. And with each of those updates, we'll update all of the data sources with whatever most recent data we have available. So for ACS data or like decennial census data, that's not very often, but we just recently got an update from the census. So this is more up to date. For the POIs, that is updated more often. These transit stops and OpenStreetMaps POIs, we'll update that right before we run the update. Let's see here. Yeah, I think, and the voting data, I guess we won't be updating that again. We'll see after the 2022 election if we include anything else, but yeah.
Yeah, and we will include the 2022 vote by mail rate and turnout, but obviously we're not through that cycle yet. So, and then I think you showed the methodology page, right? Also, unless I'm losing my mind. So,
yes.
Yeah, and that gives information just about how, as she said, the data is constructed.
Yeah, that'll tell you here under data sources what year the data is from. And I think if any data starts to get particularly old, but it's still just the most recent that we have, we'll usually note that in this limitations section here.
So before we close out, I want to mention that this is being recorded. We will share this with the rest of the group who were not able to attend, and that recording will be available to you. I know sometimes technology can be a little intimidating to us. I just really want to encourage you to get in there and play around with the tool. I've done it before and it's really cool. And like, you can't break it. So it's, it's fine. Just get in there and like start clicking things and see what happens. And some of the little informational icons will help you understand like what exactly you are looking at. And so I will send the video, the chat, the stuff in the chat that is relevant, the email address and the different websites. And yeah, that's all we have for this evening. Before we close out, does anybody have any kind of closing thoughts or questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Mindy and Kelly, for joining us. We really appreciate your time this evening. Well, it's evening in Ohio. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for being here as well. I have high hopes that this will benefit a lot of people in Ohio.
Thank you, everyone, very much. And just to let you know, we're always happy to hear from you, from people as individuals. So like if you have a question, a concern, a suggestion for a future iteration of the tool, we want to hear it. We may not be able to meet it right away, but we always want to hear it and learn how people are using it and what's useful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And with that, have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.